Good evening, dear viewers, and a warm welcome to today's episode of Visite this Sunday evening. This is now a small tradition, and this Sunday was another really wonderful day for me. And I had a lot to think about, and I'm really so grateful that there is this Sunday evening with us, with a situation where we can communicate. This is the great law of resonance. That people who can find each other will find each other somehow. And I'd like to take this opportunity to simply thank the people who make this possible. Everyone behind the scenes. QS24 TV, thank you. For this opportunity to answer questions and for being able to know your concerns. And to not just discuss them publicly with you in this context, but to be able to give you advice on holistic medicine. I think that creates a lot of trust in a time like this, and that's the point. If we humans could learn to trust ourselves again, then the fear would no longer be so present. And no matter at what stage of your illness I may encounter you, no matter whatever your motivation is to watch a program like this, believe me, I've never seen so much in my life as in the past 13 years, in which I can look after a clientele of people that gives life far more depth and attention. And sometimes is it this level of suffering that led them to look a little deeper, to look a little more behind the scenes, to tackle something in life that you just push back and forth over and over again, and suddenly doors and gates open to a path that offers something new, but also that give a body the opportunity to get well again. I just want to say that at the beginning, because it is of course a very fulfilling and great and wonderful job to be allowed to work like this and to accompany people on this path. And even if we don't know each other personally, I can see from your feedback how important and how dear such programs are to you. And for that, thank you very much again, that you fill it with so much life. I'm going to start now with an email sent to me by Yuli. And he describes that he is in a very difficult time regarding his health. He suspected, or rather did not suspect, but it was measured by an oligo scan. That is a heavy metal scan that tests the connective tissue on the left hand for toxic loads. He has found that he is carrying a high level of toxicity. He speaks of a very strong brain detox, or a very strong brain poisoning, that very many toxic metals would have been deposited there. That means he has massive heart problems. He describes that these heart problems consist of arrhythmias, severe dysregulations in the nervous system, often coupled with numbness in the chest and heavy overexcitation. So that means he really can't come to rest. Then you met someone who has carried out some diagnostic investigations and has seen that the liver is completely working inadequately in its detoxification phase 2. But what does that mean? This means that the body is unable to discharge toxic loads for years. Maybe sometimes it's decades. It had to simply deposit in the connective tissue or in the body. Sometimes these are deposits that it actually has to do, because it is always also slowly exhausting itself with the scope of its own possibilities. he notices that this retoxification manifests again and again in his nervous system, and he asks how he can get out of this whole cycle, which for him is probably also quite dramatic to experience. He started working with zeolite 2 years ago. The zeolite is a mineral, a rock mineral, which can bind toxins in the intestine, just as wonderful as chlorella or other algae. But he also tried to detox with coal, but he can no longer take these things and feels more and more poisoned as a result, and even describes that just drinking water activates the discharge of toxins so much that I actually don't know how to get out of this vicious circle, and slowly wonder, how can I find a way here? That's a big question, but I will try to structure it for you so that in future I believe you can remove from this great mountain of load. This oligoscan is often criticised. There are people who say this is a wonderful, quick diagnosis. There are others who tend to reject it a little. I have to tell you, in all honesty, I have made hair mineral analyses for many years and got wonderful results. And still people were so sick. This means that a hair mineral analysis can provide wonderful information, also for a mineral status. However, the toxic loads are only indirect, in my opinion. That is a bit of a matter of luck. Do I now have a tuft of hair that naturally absorb toxins from the scalp? This is a valuable and good detoxification of the body. But it didn't bring me enough compliance. Compliance means that I can really make a burden clear to the patient, and then I'm able to discuss the strategy with them. Ever since the oligoscan, which, by the way, I got to know in Seattle through my dear colleague Dietrich Klinghardt, who had already used this oligoscan 6 months before and carried out checkups over and over again for over half a year, and gave me advice as a very trustworthy and experienced colleague. And I actually have to support that today. It is in my office, and I can have a very nice basic diagnostics within 3 to 4 minutes. The connective tissue that we are testing here in the oligoscan is a mirror in the intercellular space. And this intercellular space is also sometimes called the body's landfill. That means health always binds itself in prerequisites that a brain, that a body, that a liver can stay healthy. And that brings up the big question of detoxification on a causal, fundamental basis. That is very important to realise. And so I thank you for having had this oligoscan, and I see an incredible number of oligoscans. Really shows a high load on the connective tissue here. It doesn't matter whether the burden is very high or whether it is less high. The body is burdened, and I already think today that we can hardly find anyone who has no stress in their body, because that is simply the time in which we live. We cannot sit in a glass case here, but these toxins are there, and they are cause that the body reacts, and that the body will try again and again to relieve itself. That is a bit of the pivotal point of the fact that the body has been trying to compensate within its capacity for many years, but slowly slips into its decompensation. And that is what you actually feel now. And now, under no circumstances should you make the mistake of rolling up your sleeves and say, then it has to come out. And even better, to start now with chelating. That is, I'll take a chelate binder, or I take chlorella, or I take zeolite and bind and bring it out. Then the body would perceive that the detox is now slowly manoeuvring itself in one direction again. And it feels relief, but it is no longer able to do this at the moment. And above all else, the whole system also dealt with this toxin surge and adapted over years to the toxin exposure. And this adaptation put it in a mess itself. I think this distress of the detox phase 2, how you describe it, that this kidney capacity is no longer given, has a lot to do with that phase 2 naturally follows phase 1. And our liver, which naturally absorbs 2,000 litres of blood a day, and the blood collects everything. Also, from the connective tissue, from the intestines, from the small pelvis, is then in phase 1, it first has to prepare that to go into phase 2. There are oxidation processes, reduction processes, and they bind to B vitamins, they bind to glutathione. They bind to flavonoids, polyphenols. These are, for example, garlic extracts. That's onion extract. So if this process of this phase is not fully clarified, and how much, in my opinion, the liver itself absorbs to first park it in your connective tissue, brings it into quite a hardship. This means the intermediate phase between 1 and 2 is actually the most dangerous, a little for the liver too. That is why it must move forward quickly. And this speedy process, I will explain to you later how you can support it, prepares for phase 2. And this phase 2 depends on the strength, on the energy output, on the production of enough ATP. Each small liver cell needs to make enough energy, ATP 38 millimoles. To do this, you need prerequisites. This second phase makes it kidney accessible. You need the 8 essential amino acids because glutathione is also built up from them. For example, cysteine is the precursor to glutathione, and this is also about an intracellular glutathione, and not just to raise blood glutathione levels. Glutathione is one of the most important antioxidants that we need for our liver detoxification, but above all else, for intracellular detoxification. These are processes that have to take place every day on every cell level as part of our energy metabolism. And then a lot of glutathione is needed, and it is always being recycled back from the oxidized to the reduced glutathione to take the high radical oxidative stress of the cell away. That said, there will be no getting around that with your knowledge now, that it was a few years ago that you could show that your phase 2 was reduced, but you should really have a detoxification profile created. So measure the oxidative stress so that you have a very current picture. How can you now actually support the liver in this way? This is a basic requirement for everything, whichever path you then choose to slowly really reduce this toxicity. It's not just the toxin pressure on the part of heavy metals and light metals. I've also read of aluminium, it's very high. There are also an incredible number of chemicals What do you know about bisphenol A? What do you know about glyphosate? What do you know about PCB? What do you know about DDT? These are all things that you might even be able to measure. That's the RA11 test, and you can do that in England, for example, in the Kent Nutrition Clinic. But perhaps it is this abundance of knowledge that is overwhelming you at the moment. Maybe you should first of all currently know what your current detox capacity is like. The second thing is that you describe that you are slowly losing a bit of sensitivity to chemicals. And I really believe that. You must always know that our brain absorbs all information pre-synaptically. That's what it is called. That means via smell, via feeling, via language, via taste, via our senses, via movement, via stimulation, via feeling. It receives information and has to process it. And this processing runs post-synaptically back to the body for 10% by consciously controlling the movement, by acting consciously and by consciously keeping the body completely safe, and send information adapted for the next moment, adapted to what it needs now. But 90% is running unconsciously, and this unconscious goes through the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is a greatest calming factor. That's the nerve that is stimulated by the program of the parasympathetic nervous system. We have an autonomous nervous system in order to create resources, to create peace, to analyze, to produce, to realize to produce enough hormones, to realize to produce enough neurotransmitters, messenger substances for the brain to regulate digestion. And if as part of a weaker detoxification performance, digestion also changes over time, and this is the second point, which is primarily controlled via the brain, via the inflammation, via the neuroinflammation. Inflammation of the brain via the vagus nerve resulted in poor digestion, inadequate provision of digestive secretions, inadequate peristalsis from dysbacteria slowly in this intestine due to malnutrition, due to a lot of dysbacteria. A so-called leaky gut syndrome develops. This has very often been discussed in the Visite episodes and also very often in the conversations. Leaky gut means that the mucous membrane permeability is now open, and this intestinal lining is stronger than the German wall. I lived in Eastern Germany, and it was impossible to get over this wall. There was a border strip there, but our intestinal wall separates us from the body. That means the gut decides what is allowed to pass through the intestinal mucosa and what has to leave it. And when this intestinal lining, due to a lot of silent inflammations, due to food intolerance, is irritated by the vagus nerve, by inflammation, by parasites, fungi, toxins, heavy metals, the effort of the liver to detoxify means not being able to do it, but via the so-called enterohepatic circulation to repeatedly pour the bile into the intestine. You are now moving in a turning loop and are well advised to approach this process a little more gently, because you also repeatedly provoke the retoxification. Therefore, the top priority is to also look if this open intestinal barrier has already led to an open blood-brain barrier. And it's this blood-brain barrier that can bring you into a state of the neuroinflammation, the inflammation in the brain, which of course no longer gives rest in the rest via a disturbed vagus nerve, in need of normal digestion, no longer having normal digestion. The high level of intoxication is also neurotoxic. Metals, for example, mercury, arsenic, also the light metal aluminium. They alone can, for example, thanks to their high affinity on the potassium and magnesium receptors of the heart, can cause arrhythmias. And you really should do your best now to recognize this. What does the intestinal body barrier look like, and what does the blood-brain barrier look like? How permeable they both are. And it is in this direction that your very highest and most serious endeavour must go. Then you have almost initially created 20 to 30% of foundation of what you need to take as a next step. And that's still not quite the same, because this chronic latent inflammations, whether they happen on the intestinal mucosa, whether they happen as neuroinflammation in your head, will of course have an impact. That scares, that causes panic. That makes cardiac arrhythmias, that makes you feel full. That makes chronic pain on a physical level. And that has something to do with the fact that as part of our lack of detoxification, we maneuver us quietly and unconsciously into this situation. And that's why there is simply no longer any need for resignation, because that is unfounded, but for mindfulness to give these processes top priority. And maybe to turn to someone who has a look at the parasitic loads in the intestine. Perhaps you first remove the biofilm that parasites create, in order to then achieve a better absorption performance, in order to really close the intestinal mucosa. Because what I experience very often is that there are so many people ingesting micronutrients. Sometimes with tumour patients, an A4 sheet is not enough, because everything should be taken and is good. This is really not a good thing. Life always organises itself. And we have to recognise why it is slowly getting into this misery. And we have to take care with little and with understanding and with mindfulness that the entire microenvironment, which has completely changed reflexively and secondarily in your intestines, the microbiome with your brain, including the microbiome in your lungs. The lungs have a causal relationship with the large intestine. These are all things that need a lot of relief in the long term. And don't think about heavy metals just yet. First of all, you create a balance for the intestine again. You can divert the biofilm wonderfully through the intestinal detox program from Vita Munda, for example, and then the mucous membrane is also in a situation where it is ready to stabilize again. You can then help with a lot of L-glutamine, with a lot of broths, chicken broth, with beef broth, with lots of good probiotics, and please deal with effective microorganisms. There you have the concentration of bifidobacteria, lactobacilli, Saccharomyces, And the stronger the healthy microflora, the stronger a strong microbiome will rebuild. Ensure that with enemas, with gentle enemas, they don't even have to contain coffee, charcoal. They can only be done with warm water, but ensure a good regular digestion. And trust your body that the moment you turn the intestine back into a strong root of the human plant uli, that is when you create the first condition that you are doing something good for the liver. And the liver starts with everything you take now. And cordyceps, for example, is a hose mushroom which can increase intracellular glutathione activation by 300%. That is L-cysteine, that is the precursor of glutathione. These are the 8 essential amino acids that our detoxification system needs. It's the B vitamins it needs, it's the zinc. And it's just trust. And always remember the most important thing is good minerals, because this is what builds it up. For example, when the heart comes into an arrhythmia, there is a lack of potassium and magnesium, minerals that can be measured intracellularly. I hope from the bottom of my heart, and it might not be over yet, but everyone, Uli, is building their house starting with the basement. And what appears to you up there is really difficult, but it's no longer just a problem of your liver. It is a problem for your entire organism. And if you manage it well, I think then you will grow a lot yourself on this topic. And health is not a gift, it's a personal task that has to be worth it for you every day to get involved. And I think you've done a lot for it. But I hope I've shed some light on this darkness. And that whenever you have questions, of course, feel free to send them to Visite at QS24.tv. And I wish you all a wonderful Sunday evening, and I am very much looking forward to next Sunday with you. Goodbye.